Since October 7th, Jews around the world have been struggling with what is happening in Israel. The word Israel actually translates to something like struggles with God and comes from a story in the Bible. Well, my next guest says this kind of struggling is fundamental to what it means to be a Jew today, as his new book is called. Noah Feldman is a professor at the Harvard Law School. Noah, pleasure to have you on. Now, you are one of the most important scholars of constitutional law in the country. You've written incredible books about all kinds of other things. You helped write the Constitution of Iraq. Did you ever think you would write a book about being Jewish, and why are you doing it?
I actively thought I would never write a book about being Jewish, even though being Jewish is hugely important to me, and I was raised in a traditionally observant home and have studied Judaism most of my life, because I thought of it as a personal thing that no one would really want to hear what I thought about. And as my kids got ready to go off to college, I started thinking about how different their experience was going to be with respect to being Jewish than mine was back when I did. And that got me thinking, this is long before October 7, about 3 years ago, about how things have changed in the Jewish world, how beliefs have changed, how politics has changed, and really how the experience of being Jewish has changed.
And what do you think is the central message or the difference you want to talk about being a Jew today?
The central message of the book is that being Jewish is sort of like belonging to a large, loving, and somewhat dysfunctional family, in which everybody's way of doing it is legit. At the same time, not everybody agrees even who is in the family. You know, it's a modern family with divorce and adoption and marriage and all sorts of people showing up. For a lot of Jews, Israel has become very central to defining what their Jewish experience is, whether they like it or not. And that's driving, in turn, real conflict within the Jewish community, especially generational conflict, between Jews who are still closely identified with Israel and see that as central to being Jewish, but who are themselves relatively liberal or progressive people in many cases and believe that Judaism is social justice. And then a younger generation of folks, many of them on college campuses, who are also, like their parents, committed to the idea that being Jewish means being committed to social justice, but who don't necessarily see Israel as fitting that paradigm. They're being critical of Israel in a way that their parents or their grandparents just consider to be shocking and mistaken, and in some way a betrayal of their Jewishness. And so what I'm trying to do in the book is account for all of these different ways that people are experiencing being Jewish, and to try to remind everybody that it's okay to have disagreement, because, as you mentioned, being Jewish is fundamentally about combining the love and the struggle. And that's because it's like being in a family, and families are where we get our first experience of love and belonging, but they're also where we get our first experiences of struggle often.
But now, against this backdrop, you do have rising anti-Semitism. And what I want to ask you is, do you think that that most of what you're seeing is rising anti-Semitism, or is it anti-Israel? Is it again directed against things Israel is doing, or is it anti-Zionism? You know, if you think of it as there's three things.
Yes.
One, Bibi Netanyahu and his war, and
Yes.
the right-wing governments for the last 15 years, and lots of people criticize that. There are people who think Israel as a state founded on religious nationalism is problematic. And then there's anti-Semitism.
Yes.
And the three seem to bleed together.
Yes. I think it mostly starts with objections to Israel's policies and to Benjamin Netanyahu, and those are reasonable, and you can have those views and not be in any way even anti-Israel, much less anti-Semitic. But from there then emerges a harsher, typically left-wing critique that says, you know, Israel is an illegitimate state. And unlike other nation states, all of which have their challenges, as we know, it alone is the kind of state that shouldn't be allowed to exist. And once you start going down that road, even unconsciously, it opens the door to a view that can become anti-Semitic, whether intentionally or otherwise.
When you look at being Jewish going forward, there are a lot of people who worry that you're seeing two trends. One is younger Jews who come out of, I would guess, kind of families like yours are becoming more and more liberal, more and more secular, more and more, less and less religious and observant. Mm-hmm. So they're essentially merging into the more general secularized American population or European population. And then a strain of very orthodox, you know, kind of Hasidic, Haredi where the birth rates are rising. So that's what you'll be left with is, that world of secularized European Ashkenazi Jews that I think you come out of is disappearing.
Yeah. Despite their prediction that they're going to all disappear, which has been made by Orthodox critics of progressive Judaism for now almost 200 years, it hasn't happened. People maintain really strong Jewish identities, even if they're not going to synagogue very much or ever, even if they don't have a bar mitzvah. And then the other thing is there's also a community of people in the middle. Sometimes they would be called modern Orthodox. The idea is that these are folks who both adhere to the tradition and also move freely in the modern world. And their numbers are, interestingly, also growing. And they tend to be very Zionist and very committed to the project of Israel as central to their religious experience. So you actually have this big diversity. And the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, whom you mentioned, they're rising in numbers too, because they have a much higher birth rate. But it's a challenge for the Jewish community to remember what they have in common, even as they have different approaches to how they want to live their lives.
In a way, don't their enemies help in that regard? I mean, the anti-Semites make sure everyone remembers they're Jewish.
That's the old-fashioned view of, Jean-Paul Sartre said, the anti-Semite makes the Jew. It's this old idea that you can't just escape being Jewish. But that's actually not true anymore. You can walk away from being Jewish, and no one will be any the wiser most of the time. So what Jews need is an internal reason to stick with what they're doing. Within this familial conception, there's a common commitment to trying to make sense of the world. So to make sense of the world takes some work. It's not an easy way of being alive. It doesn't give you simple answers. But collectively, even with disagreement, Jews can work on trying to figure out how they think about God, how they think about faith if they believe, and how they think about their own experience as Jews.
Well, you write intelligently about everything, but this is a book that I think lots of people should read. And in particular, every Jewish parent who worries about their children should give their children this as a gift. Noah Feldman, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for saying that, Fareed.
Next on GPS, is China on the path to bring Taiwan under its full control by brute force? It's something I try to answer in my latest special, which airs tonight on CNN at 8 p.m. It's called Taiwan, Unfinished Business. I'll give you a sneak preview when we come back.